If you struggle with BPD, then you have probably at some point in your life self-harmed. This is super common and is actually one of the most common symptoms for those who struggle with borderline personality disorder. And the problem with self-harm is that it can quickly become an addiction. So what do we do about this? If you're struggling with this and you're curious to know, I encourage you to stick around. Welcome back to my channel, lovely people. For those of you who are new here, my name is Kayla and I release new videos every Monday about all things BPD. So if that sounds good to you, be sure to hit the subscribe button down below as well as the bell notification up top. Now, as I had just mentioned, we are going to be talking about self-harm. I think that this is a really important topic. It's something that's kind of like taboo and not, I don't know, it's never really fun to talk about, and I think that this is one of those topics that can make a lot of people uncomfortable, that they rather just avoid talking about the topic altogether. I get it, this is really emotionally charged, it's really hard for people, and even talking about it can be triggering to some extent, and so if you find this content triggering, please do not watch this. I have a bunch of other videos about all different things relating to BPD. So if you're feeling particularly emotional or triggered by this topic, just go ahead and click one of the videos up here, watch them, and get information. So the first thing to address when talking about self-harm is, why does this even happen? How does this start? So there's a few different reasons. So things, for example, like wanting to express your emotional pain physically, not being able to cope with your emotions, right? So having all of these intense feelings, not knowing what to do with them, and then kind of acting on it. It could be acting out of impulse. You could be wanting or feeling like you deserve punishment, so you're doing that. Or some people, they feel really empty inside, and so they self-harm because they just want to feel something. I want to stress the fact that this varies from person to person, but also from context to context. So maybe in one situation, because of something that's happened, you feel like you deserve to be punished, and so you'll self-harm. But in another situation, you may feel empty and numb inside, and so you self-harm. So there's no right or wrong reason why this starts. It's really context dependent. And so just having this awareness of why it starts can help you understand your triggers a bit better. The problem with self-harm is that this can quickly become an addiction. So when you're self-harming, you're getting relief. Okay, whether that's emotional, physical, you're feeling something, and it helps to deal or cope with the difficult situations. And so the next time that something happens and you don't know what to do with your things, well, you're going to self-harm again. And we know that self-harming is a impermanent and a temporary situation. And so while we feel better momentarily, we're going to feel worse again, which then when we don't have the skills or tools to cope with this, then it makes sense that our automatic go-to is self-harming. And this is why this is a dangerous cycle that can quickly turn into an addiction. And yes, the addiction piece of it is super dangerous, but we also have the feelings that's mixed up in keeping this addiction going, which is the feelings of guilt and shame after. And this is often where this self-harming, because we feel like we deserve punishment, comes into play. Because if you've had a moment where you've lashed out at someone or at yourself, I know personally me, after, I feel like the worst person ever. Although self-harm is not a symptom that I struggle with when it comes to my BPD specifically, I can definitely see how it would be easy to go towards that, because it's something that you have control over. When we feel out of control, when we feel like we don't have control over our relationships and other people and what they're doing, then yeah, turning to that makes sense. Me, for example, it's more like the binge eating, so the impulsivity that I have a hard time with. Food for me becomes this kind of addictive pattern that I turn to when I'm feeling bored or when I'm feeling overwhelmed and sad, because it's something that I have control over. So how do we stop doing this for good? The first thing I will recommend is to develop awareness of your triggers. So I have talked about this in the past, but imagine that emotions are on a thermometer kind of scale. So from 0 to 30, you're in the green zone. This is when you can use your mindfulness skills. From 30 to 70, this is the yellow zone. This is where you would use the emotion regulation skills from DBT. And from 70 to 100, this is the red zone. This is 911, you're in crisis. This is distress tolerance skills. So if we know our triggers, the things that make us jump from green to red or yellow to red, then we can deal with things preemptively to not allow ourselves to go as frequently into that zone. Because if you're self-harming when you're in a crisis, if you can minimize the times when you're feeling like you're in a crisis, maybe you're still jumping from green to yellow, you're going from 15 to 60, okay, but within that range, you still feel somewhat in control of yourself. That's a great first step. So learning triggers by assessing situations, journaling about it, going to therapy, those are all things that you can use. The second thing I would recommend is to have a plan for when you are in the red zone, because this will happen. That's fine. You're not failing because you're getting into crisis mode. That's not the problem. We want to learn triggers to minimize the times that we're going into it, but then when it does happen, because it will, we want to have a plan. So in DBT, we call this a cope ahead. And cope ahead is essentially writing out the situation. So what you think your triggers are, what your emotions will be, what are tools or things that you can do in that moment to help you deal with those intense emotions. Keeping things in your bedroom or having like a 911 crisis kit close to you might be a good idea. Also, this is something that I recommend to my clients. So having a little box and keeping Pop Rocks or a really sour candy in there, taking a cold shower, listening to really loud music, going for a run, punching your pillow if you need to. So doing things to get those emotions out. We here want to just focus on not making the moment worse. So we want to deal with the feelings. And oftentimes when we're in this red zone, this is not the time to try to reason with yourself. It's not the time to try to do mindfulness skills, because you're in this fight or flight mode. When we look at rats, for example, who are really stressed, when they experience high anxiety or stress or something in their life, they will literally shake it out. This is what I want you to do now. Instead of going towards the self-harm, you are going to shake out the feelings in another way. Going for a run is really awesome. Shocking your system with a cold shower, eating a sour candy, eating a lemon, doing something to distract yourself. You can even write on your arms or wherever you have a tendency to self-harm the feelings that you're experiencing. Something else also that falls within this category of coping ahead or having a plan is just to put off the urge or the self-harm for a minute. So you tell yourself, okay, I'm just going to put it off for a minute or 5 minutes, and then after that I'll come back and see how I'm feeling. Or you tell yourself, I'm just going to do one of the activities on my list before I self-harm. So I'm going to go for a run before. I'm going to take a shower before. And oftentimes what happens is that when we do the thing, when we take the break, after when we come back, the urge has passed and we don't want to do it anymore. The third and final thing is just to remind yourself that relapses will happen. I don't know why we have it in our minds, this idea or this notion that once we stop, this is never going to happen ever again. No, relapses are part of the process, and it's not so much the relapse that's the issue. It's we want to be focused on how we pick ourselves back up after. You might feel like you're back to square one and that you've undone all your progress. That's not the reality though, because you have been working towards building the skills, gaining awareness of your triggers, gaining different tools and things that you can do when you're in a crisis mode, so that, okay, you relapse, that's okay. You can pick yourself back up. And so the next time when you get urges, you're going to see that it's going to get much easier. I know it may feel like everything is undone. Trust me, it's not though, because and sometimes it's hard to see this from the day-to-day or even month-to-month because not a lot of time has passed. But when we look at it on a year scale or a few years scale, you can actually see how far you've actually come and how much progress you've made. And don't look at progress by measuring the number of times that you've self-harmed specifically, but What tools have you learned? How have you changed as a person? How have your relationships improved, right? What different things other than self-harm have you gained positively in your life? And when we look at those things, we can see, okay, wow, I have changed. And this is a hiccup along the road. I can pick myself back up from this. I can keep going and move forward because I have done this in the past. If you're struggling, I hope that this was helpful to you. I know how difficult it can be when we have all of these really intense emotions, really intense urges, feeling very alone and misunderstood, or feeling like a bad person, or feeling empty and feeling like we just want to be connected to reality. I know the feelings. I know how difficult and alienating it can be. Just remind yourself that you're here right now taking the time to learn about these things. You're connecting with a community of people who understand you and who feel your struggle, myself included. So on that note, have an amazing rest of your week, and I will see you next time for another episode of On the Line.